The Orioles very soon, for the first time all season, could find themselves healthy and at full strength, or almost at full strength. So, if they get to that point sometime here in May, what would the roster look like? Try to answer those questions and more coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Orioles fans, today is Friday, May 10th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to take a look at the Orioles health-wise right now. There are still three somewhat key players on the injured list in Tyler Wells, Grayson Rodriguez, and Austin Hayes, but they could all be coming back fairly soon. We'll talk about what that could mean for the Orioles roster. Then we'll chat a little bit about the O's bullpen. It's pitching well, except for its veteran closer. I'll give you my latest edition of the Bullpen Trust Rankings and finally get you a quick preview of this weekend series between the Orioles and the Diamondbacks. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. First, just want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first podcast listen of the day. We're free and available on all podcast listening platforms. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. And of course, leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen if you can. It really, really helps out the show. And thank you specifically to the everydayers out there who are with us day in and day out throughout this Orioles season. Make sure to tell a friend, tell a coworker, tell anyone around you who likes the Orioles to check out the Locked On Orioles podcast. And on today's episode, because the O's had another off day, no game on Thursday after they won that wild game Wednesday night to split the two-game series in D.C., the Orioles using 7 of their 8 relievers, so kind of nice they had the off day Thursday before heading back home to take on the D-backs this weekend. Wanted to get to some Orioles news and notes here, and really wanted to focus on the 3 main injured Orioles who are due to come back this season. Now, I would still argue one of the main injured Orioles is Felix Bautista, but we know he's not returning in 2024 after getting Tommy John surgery back in October. But we start with Grayson Rodriguez. Got a few updates on him back on Wednesday. They did throw his first bullpen session on Wednesday since going on the 15-day injured list back on April 30th with some shoulder soreness. Now, as soon as Grayson went on the IL a couple of weeks ago, immediately Brandon Hyde did say, hey, we feel this is more precautionary than anything else. He woke up with more soreness in his shoulder than he generally does after a start. We just wanted to proceed with caution. And it also did kind of work out that freed up a roster spot and a rotation spot to bring John Means back. And of course, he was incredible in that first start in Cincinnati. And we'll see Means again this weekend against the D-backs. It kind of delayed that conversation for the Orioles for a little longer about, do we go to a 6-man rotation? Does someone who's pitching well have to go to the bullpen? They kicked that can down the road a little bit with the Rodriguez thing. But the nice part is he would be eligible to come back on May 15th. So, kind of in the middle of next week, he could be due back. That doesn't mean he absolutely will come back right at the 15 days. It's sometimes tough for players to do that. But Rodriguez said Wednesday that he's hoping that he doesn't even need a rehab outing in AAA Norfolk, that he feels it was all precautionary, and then coming off the IL would send him right back into the Orioles rotation. Rodriguez is a guy that, if healthy, he is, I think, along with 2 other pitchers, Corbin Burns and Kyle Bradish, guaranteed no matter what a spot in the Orioles starting rotation. Everyone else, you could argue maybe things happening, whatever, could move to the bullpen. Those 3 guys have a spot. So whenever Grayson comes back, he's going to have a start. Now, May 15th would be the final game of the series next week between the Orioles and the Blue Jays at Camden Yards. It is scheduled right now most likely to be a start for Cole Irvin. However, maybe you want Irvin to avoid all the righties. A lot of right-handed hitters in the Blue Jays lineup. A lot of them theoretically have power, although this Toronto team is, let's just face it, they've been pretty bad so far in 2024. Maybe you want Irvin to avoid all those righties. Maybe you give Rodriguez that start. Then there's an off day Thursday. You push Irvin back to Friday. But the real question is, once Grayson Rodriguez comes back, whether it is on May 15th or, they push him back a little bit later, but he does return at some point. What do you do with this rotation? Again, Burns and Bradish locked in if they're healthy. Rodriguez locked in if they're healthy. You still got Dean Kramer, John Means, and Cole Irvin all in that mix. Now, we already know Albert Suarez, at least for now, has lost his rotation spot. He's working out of the bullpen and might even get some high leverage chances. He certainly got one on Wednesday night out of the Orioles pen. And I think the first inkling is to say, oh, let's just go to a six-man rotation. The Orioles went to a six-man rotation for a bit in the second half of last season, and it seemingly worked at least okay for the Orioles. But there's a couple of drawbacks to a six-man rotation. One is Corbin Burnes is an ace-type pitcher. Corbin Burnes could be a Cy Young winner, and it's not impossible that the Orioles could re-sign Corbin Burnes after this season, but I think the general understanding is Corbin Burnes is in Baltimore for one season. And if Burnes is pitching in a six-man rotation, you are just getting less innings out of Corbin Burnes by the end of the year, and that is not what you want. It's not to say, oh, the Orioles need to just run Corbin Burnes into the ground and then let him go into free agency because he's not their problem anymore. It's more of you want to maximize what Burnes can give you if you're only going to get him for 1 year. And again, with a six-man rotation, that means Burnes has one more day of rest every time, and by the end of the year, you probably lose 1 to 2 starts because you're pitching every sixth day, sometimes every seventh day if there's an off day, instead of every fifth day. So if you want a six-man rotation, I would try to find a way to still have Corbin Burnes pitch every fifth day and then kind of weed guys in and out around him. The issue with that is then you are messing up the schedule with, at some point, all 5 of the other pitchers in your rotation at some point will weirdly have to take an extra day, and then the next time they won't take an extra day, and that could screw up with the routine of some of your other starters. The other thing is, if you go to a six-man rotation, you have to go with one less reliever. The maximum you can have on your roster is 13 pitchers. Generally, teams 5 starters and 8 relievers. But if you go to 6 starters, that means you can only have 7 relievers. And again, the Orioles did it at the end part of last year. When they were doing it, they had Felix Bautista. They do not have Felix Bautista right now. They also have a struggling Craig Kimbrell. We are trying to find out what they're going to do with him. Now, the Orioles now do have a long man in the bullpen. That is Albert Suarez. They had not had that all year until Suarez was moved to the pen. But after seeing Wednesday night, maybe Suarez isn't going to be just a long man. He's going to pitch in some high leverage spots as well. It's easier to do a 7-man bullpen if you have a long man who can chew up innings, but I'm not sure that's going to be just precisely Albert Suarez's role, which makes it tougher for the Orioles to do this. So until Rodriguez gets back, everybody else in that rotation, including Means, Kramer, and Irvin, who all could theoretically be moved to the bullpen, will all get at least one more start for the Orioles, and Irvin possibly could get 2 more starts before Rodriguez comes back. And I think Cole Irvin, despite 3 consecutive scoreless starts, 21 straight scoreless innings for the left-hander in the Orioles rotation, is the guy who is most likely to go to the pen. He's got the least significant track record with the Orioles, and he already pitched out of the bullpen for a chunk of last season, and honestly pitched well when he was coming out of the pen for the Orioles in 2023, and I think could certainly do it again for the O's in 2024, but it's hard right now to move a guy to the bullpen that is basically putting up, 6+ innings scoreless in each of his last 3 starts. It's hard to make a move there to put him into the pen. So I'm not still quite sure, but these things do seem to work themselves out. And maybe if Grayson's delayed a little bit more, maybe it takes him 2 more weeks from now before he returns to the rotation. Maybe Irvin struggles. Maybe Kramer struggles. Maybe somebody else comes up with a little bit of an ailment. Maybe you find a way to do something where, Kramer, Burnes, and Rodriguez pitch on regular rest, but maybe you go to a 6-man rotation that allows Bradish and Means to get some extra days off just because, they started the year on the IL and you're still really monitoring the health of those 2 guys. Or Rodriguez goes into that camp as well because he was just on the injured list with the shoulder thing. There's a lot of things the Orioles could do. They have a lot to figure out, but I wouldn't just say, 6-man rotation, because there's a lot of other dominoes that fall there that can make things tough. Now, they also have Tyler Wells, who did start the year in the rotation and then went on the injured list with some elbow inflammation. Now, Brandon Hyde told the media on Wednesday that Tyler Wells is currently down in Sarasota at the Orioles spring training site. He is throwing, but didn't give any kind of timeline on him returning to the Orioles. Now, you could make the argument that, hey, when Wells returns, say he comes back in June or something, he's also in this conversation for the rotation. I would say probably not. At this point, we've just seen Tyler Wells be a better reliever than he is a starter overall. His body is broken down as a starting pitcher each of the last 2 years. And with the starting depth the Orioles have right now, not to say that maybe a month from now when Wells is ready to come back, they will still have this much depth. But if they have anything close to it, Tyler Wells is coming back in the bullpen. That would be my opinion on Tyler Wells. And he can be good there. He can be a multi-inning guy. He can be a middle reliever. He could be a setup guy. Heck, he was kind of the de facto closer for a couple of weeks at the end of last season once he came back in September after the Orioles had lost Bautista. He could be that closer role if Craig Kimbrell ends up not being your guy this year. But I do think you got to get him healthy and make sure he's healthy before you're saying, oh, Tyler Wells is coming back to be our closer. Like I'm seeing a lot of, oh, the Orioles have Tyler Wells. Like they're fine at closer. Tyler Wells is on the injured list with an elbow injury. Those things can get dicey. He's not super close to coming back anyway. So you got to slow your roll on that one a little bit. Like you don't know still what you're going to get out of a guy that's on the IL with an elbow injury. Those can be scary, but I do think he's probably just not going to be in that rotation conversation unless there are other injuries once he hopefully does come back for the Orioles. And then the last guy close to coming back is Austin Hayes. He might be the closest of any of these three guys to returning to the Orioles. He's been on the injury list for a few weeks now with a calf issue. We know how bad the start was for Hayes. He had been honestly dreadful at the plate, had been moved to a bench role. Colton Cowser completely took his starting left field job. And then to make matters worse, Hayes started to swing the bat a little bit better and then got himself injured. Now, Hayes has been in Bowie this week in Double-A rehabbing, and he's played in games on Tuesday and Wednesday after kind of starting to work out there over the weekend. He did homer on Wednesday night for Bowie, which was a nice thing to see. For Austin Hayes, who hasn't flashed any power at all, like did not have an extra base hit this year so far before he went on the injured list. So even though he's facing Double-A pitching, nice to see him hit a ball over the fence. Now, you could say, oh, why is he in Bowie? Does he still have to go to Norfolk? It might just be that because the Norfolk Tides are in Memphis this week, and Bowie's at home right down the street. If the Orioles want to bring Hayes back soon, it's just much easier to be in Bowie instead of be in Memphis, but maybe they're waiting longer and they do want him to face some AAA pitching. The issue for Hayes is, even if he comes back, say, next week, the Orioles starting tonight will be facing, and this is just on the homestand. It could extend past that when they go back on the road, but they will face 8 right-handed pitchers in this 9-game homestand, it looks like. And because of that, Austin Hayes at this point is just not going to be starting against a righty. There's too many good hitters to get in there. He'll probably get some starts against left-handed pitching, and the Orioles will most likely see Yusei Kikuchi on Wednesday in the final game against the Blue Jays. He is a left-hander, so if Hayes is back by then, expect him to get his first start back in that game. But he's going to be relegated again to a bench role, especially with all these righties coming up. The only silver lining kind of is, if you're facing all those righties anyway, and Hayes does come back soon, at the worst, Austin Hayes is just a better version of Ryan McKenna for your roster. And so if you're not planning on starting McKenna because you're facing so many right-handed pitchers, you would think that if Hayes comes back on Monday and rejoins the Orioles, you would think that a Ryan McKenna DFA is the move to clear on the roster instead of optioning Heston Kjerstad. Because if you've got a bench version of Austin Hayes, again, at his worst, he's just a better Ryan McKenna. And if you're not facing lefties, you're not starting McKenna anyway. You're using Hayes off the bench as your defensive replacement. That could be the silver lining for Austin Hayes coming back, at least knowing that, hey, got a reset, hopefully, and can take Ryan McKenna's roster spot. But that's kind of what the roster would look like over the next couple of weeks as the Orioles move forward. And of course, the other thing with Grayson Rodriguez coming back is you got to make another roster move. Like, you don't just have to make a rotation move. You got to make a full roster move. It seems like that would have to be the point when Mike Baumann gets the DFA. Like, the Orioles used 7 relievers in a 12-inning game on Wednesday night. The one guy they didn't use, Mike Baumann. He's just not being trusted right now. He's survived this long somehow into May 10th, but he has got to be that next guy on the chopping block. And that's what we're getting to next. Those bullpen trust rankings. I think you can probably parse out what category Mike Baumann's going to be in. But how about the rest of the Orioles relievers? Where do I see them in those trust rankings? That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Stitch Fix. You know that instant confidence boost you get from an outfit that makes you look really good? Well, that's what you can get with Stitch Fix. You can easily upgrade your wardrobe this year with a professional stylist that helps you find new on-trend favorites that will work for you. Your stylist can send you just the right pieces, and the fit seems to always be on point. I don't know how they do it, but they just kind of get your style and they make it so easy. And they make it easy for me because you don't have to shop and you can save that time and effort. So style that makes you feel as good as you look. You can get started today at stitchfix.com/MLB and get $20 off your first fix. That's stitchfix.com/MLB for $20 off. One more time, stitchfix.com/MLB. Must redeem within 7 days of sign up. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by the DK Law Group. DK Law Group is a Maryland-based law firm who is redefining the legal process with a very modern approach. DK Law Group specializes in real estate law, estate planning, business law, and family law. And they are super tech savvy. They treat their clients like family, and they focus on keeping your legal solutions simple. The DK Law Group knows that speed is key, so they leverage technology to streamline the process to serve you better and serve you faster. So contact DK Law Group today at dklawmd.com. And Locked On listeners can call today to schedule a free 30-minute consultation when you mention the tagline, Empowering Legacies. So with the Orioles getting a little healthier, pitching-wise, maybe Grayson soon, maybe Tyler Wells soon after that, you got to continue to evaluate this pitching staff and specifically this bullpen, because I think the bullpen generally did a nice job of helping the Orioles win that game Wednesday, but Craig Kimbrell did not. And now there's a lot of talk about, will Craig Kimbrell have the ninth inning? Is he the closer anymore? Go back and listen to Thursday's episode. I kind of went through my pecking order and what it would look like in the ninth if Craig Kimbrell goes on the IL, or at least it's kind of given a break from that high leverage role. But let's roll out the Bullpen Trust Rankings. I believe the third time this year we'll go into the Bullpen Trust Rankings. How do they work? Well, I take the current 8 Orioles relievers and I put them in 3 categories: trust, maybe trust, and don't trust, and give you the reasonings for all 3. Right now, kind of surprisingly, but I feel good about this bullpen right now besides Kimbrell. I've got 5 of the Orioles' 8 relievers in the trust category. It starts with Yennier Cano, who has rattled off 6 consecutive scoreless appearances out of the Orioles bullpen. The stuff looks just as nasty as it did last year. ERA sitting right about 2. Yeah, he's not as dominant as he was at times last season, but it's still been a productive reliever. And his 71% ground ball rate this year is just crazy elite. Like, everything is on the ground. Danny Coulombe, also in my trust category. 8 of his last 9 appearances have been scoreless. And over that 9 appearance scoreless streak, 8 out of 9 scoreless streak, he has not walked a batter in those last 9 appearances. He throws strikes. He gets people out. Righties, lefties, gets them both. He'll come in really any situation. He'll pitch the 5th. He'll get a save for the O's. He's already done it this year. And Cano and Coulombe, both guys who I think, if Craig Kimbrell loses the 9th inning job, will fill in potentially a kind of closer by committee for Brandon Hyde's bullpen in the 9th inning moving forward. Also in the trust category, I've got Jacob Webb. For the second straight time, Jacob Webb pitching well enough to get in the trust category, make it 6 consecutive scoreless outings, at least without an earned run for Jacob Webb. Of course, he did give up a run Wednesday night, but that was the zombie runner. It is unearned, so 6 straight without an earned run. He got the save Wednesday. He's had 2 saves in that stretch. The stuff looks good. His changeup is one of the best in baseball right now. The Orioles are happy that they held on to Jacob Webb through that bullpen crunch this season. Another guy already with 2 saves is going to get some more chances, I think, if Kimbrell doesn't have the job. Into the trust rankings for the first time this year. CNL Perez in the trust category. Last time I did it was right when Perez got back. I put him in the maybe trust because I was like, he's pitched 1 time. I just don't know, coming off that oblique injury. But since he came off the IL, CNL Perez, after giving the Orioles an inning and a third scoreless on Wednesday, has gone 4 1/3 scoreless innings, just 2 hits, 2 strikeouts, and no walks since returning off the injured list. Yeah, it's not a lot of Ks, but that's not his game. It's a lot of ground balls. He gets the Orioles out of jams. He will get maybe some save chances if the O's go there. It would have to be like a lefty-heavy part of the order to go to CNL Perez in the 9th inning, but he's done it before. He had, I believe, a save or 2 for the Orioles last year as well, and I'm trusting him at the moment with that high-velocity fastball coming out of the left side. And the last guy in the trust category, I teetered back and forth. I almost put him in maybe trust, but I ended up saying, you know what? Brandon Hyde clearly trusts him. I'm going to trust him as well, and that is Keegan Aiken, the final pitcher in the trust category. Listen, 7 of his last 8 appearances out of the Oriole bullpen have been scoreless. Aiken was entrusted on Wednesday night with trying to close out that game after Craig Kimbrell left. Came into it first and third, 2 outs, 3-2 lead in the ninth. Unfortunately, he gives up the game-tying single to C.J. Abrams, but he did get Luis Garcia to ground out to keep it tied and get it to extra innings. It was really kind of an impossible spot for Aiken, who didn't expect to have to come into that game. When Craig Kimbrell goes in up 3-1 in the ninth, you're like, all right, our bullpen's done for the day. Had to warm up quickly, go out there. It was nice by him to just get out of it and keep it tied. He's gotten some really key outs lately, got out of a bases-loaded jam in the 8th inning on Tuesday as well. I still don't know if I'm going to give him any save chances. I don't think the Orioles really will unless it's kind of an emergency like it turned into on Wednesday, but I would still, even in his middle relief role, put him in the trust category. So that leaves us with 3 relievers in 2 categories. And in maybe trust, I've got 2 guys right now. The first is Albert Suarez. Now, most of Albert Suarez being in the maybe trust is just, we've only seen him pitch in relief twice for the Orioles, and 2 outings is not enough sample size for me to put him in the trust category yet. Now, the first one in Cincinnati was good, 7 up, 7 down, and in very low leverage. The Orioles were up 6-0 when he did that. Then he got a high leverage spot on Wednesday, came out there in the 10th, tie game, zombie runner at second, and he gets out of the inning. However, the Orioles took the 5-3 lead in the 11th. He goes back out there, and Suarez kind of fell apart a little bit, allowed the Nats to score 2 runs, tie the game, and send it into the 12th. So it was really good in that first inning, not as good the second inning. I'm still not sure what the Suarez bullpen role will be moving forward. At this point, he's kind of a Swiss Army knife. He can be your long guy if he's rested. If he's not as rested, I think the stuff can play up for 1-inning stints in the bullpen. Again, nothing against him in the maybe trust, just haven't seen it enough out of the pen to put him in the trust category just yet. And my other pitcher in maybe trust is Craig Kimbrell. Now, he's a guy who I teetered on putting in don't trust, but I kept him in maybe trust for now. It has not been good lately. One of the reasons I put him in maybe trust is because if you're just looking at the pure stuff, he's still one of the Orioles' best relievers, and the ceiling for him is to still be one of the best relievers in the bullpen. Like, I'm not sure the ceiling for someone like Albert Suarez is to be one of the best relievers in the bullpen. I'm not sure the ceiling for even guys like Keegan Aiken and Cionel Perez is the best reliever, or Jacob Webb even is the best reliever in the bullpen. It still is for Craig Kimbrell. We've seen it. But we know how the results have been lately. Now, I'm a little worried that he is still somewhat injured and he's dealing with something. And that's the other reason why he's in maybe trust and not don't trust, because I just think you had that back issue that cropped up. I just feel like the best thing to do is like use the back issue as something, just throw him on the 15-day injured list, let him reset, throw a couple of rehab outings in AAA, and bring him back at the start of June and just let him fully reset things. I still think you can get the Orioles some key outs this year, but I don't think it can be in the 9th inning in high leverage spots, at least for a little bit now. And the final pitcher on the list is the only guy in the don't trust category. And he's been there pretty much all year. That is Mike Baumann. He continues to struggle. His last outing was kind of a disaster. Remember the Orioles, I mean, rightfully so, we're just trying to get him work. They were up 11-0 in the bottom of the 9th in Cincinnati. Albert Suarez even got the first batter out of the 9th. They pull Suarez, they put in Baumann and say, look, you've been struggling, but it's 11-0. There's already 1 out. There's nobody on base. Just give us a clean 2 outs and you'll start feeling good. He kind of imploded. He was lucky that he only gave up 1 run before ending that game in the 9th, but he loaded the bases. He looked awful. I think it's almost over for Baumann. And basically, I feel like he's just holding on until the Orioles need to make another roster move. So whether it's Grayson Rodriguez coming back, maybe it ends up being, I don't think it would be, but potentially if it's Tyler Wells before that coming back, like the next move they have to make to get a pitcher back, I don't see the other move to make unless someone else is hurt than for it to be Mike Baumann getting DFA'd. It's unfortunate, but he hasn't been good. The Orioles aren't using him in any high leverage spots at all. Brandon Hyde's kind of actively avoiding using him, and for good reason. His days are numbered, I feel, as an Oriole. But those are the Bullpen Trust rankings. Let me know. Was I right? Was I wrong? Tell me in the YouTube comments right now what your Bullpen Trust rankings would look like. One more segment to get to on the show. I want to get you a preview. Orioles, Diamondbacks this weekend. We'll preview the series coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Policygenius. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting today. And with Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. You can talk to a team of award-winning agents at Policygenius. They will walk you through the process step by step. I get it. Life insurance, that is a stressful thing to even think about, but the people and the agents at Policygenius, they will help you make the right decisions. So check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonmlb or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonmlb. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by DoorDash. Mother's Day is coming up this Sunday, and all the gifts you need for mom, well, you could find them on DoorDash. It's never too late to show mom your love this Mother's Day with DoorDash. Surprise your mom with flowers, gadgets, and self-care essentials all in one place, delivered right to her door. Whether she's got a sweet tooth, a tech enthusiast, beauty connoisseur, she just loves fruit or flowers or whatever, you can get it all at DoorDash. And you can get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order now on DoorDash. You just got to use the code LOCKEDONMLB. That is code LOCKEDONMLB. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. So to quickly finish things off here on a Friday episode, just going to preview the upcoming weekend series. The Orioles are welcoming the defending National League champions into Oriole Park at Camden Yards. It is the Arizona Diamondbacks who are coming to town. And the D-backs, they've struggled for a good portion of this year, but they're coming in maybe their best streak of the season. Diamondbacks now 18-20 on the year. They just swept a series in Cincinnati. Sound familiar? That's what the O's just did as well. And they have won 4 games in a row coming into this series in Baltimore. I would argue Arizona playing their best baseball of the year right now. Still kind of far down those National League standings, but starting to play it a little bit better. Now, looking at the Arizona offense, it's been pretty good. By WRC Plus standards, 11th best offense in Major League Baseball. Orioles are 5th, for example. So they've been swinging it pretty well. They don't hit for a crazy amount of power, but they do walk a lot and they don't strike out a lot, which is a pretty good combination to get runners on base, and they will come through when they need to with runners in scoring position. Christian Walker, former Orioles, been awesome. Ketel Marte has been awesome. Jock Peterson, who they brought in, has kind of randomly been really, really good for them this year. The issue for the Diamondbacks has been Corbin Carroll, who was a star last year, won NL Rookie of the Year, has been abysmal. Going into play Thursday, he had a 65 OPS plus on the year. Just been terrible. He swung it a little better the last couple of days, but that's something to look out for. Like, he had been their star, and he has been really, really bad going through the sophomore slump this year. Now, looking at the bullpen, it's been bad. I mean, Corbin Carroll's struggles have been tough, but the offense is good in general. The reason why the D-backs have been this bad, their bullpen has been really bad. Remember, their bullpen was an issue going into the playoffs last year, and then they just found the right combination to help them get to the World Series before losing to the Rangers. But the bullpen doesn't strike anybody out, and it walks way too many batters. Now, their closer, Paul Sewald, did just return from the injured list for the first time this year and converted both of his save opportunities this week. So their bullpen just got a lot better. And Kevin Ginkel, who was kind of their bullpen star in the playoffs last year, did a good job filling in the 9th inning for Sewald while he was gone. Ryan Thompson, the former kind of sidewinding Tampa Bay Ray, he's been pretty good too. But otherwise, everybody else in that bullpen has kind of just been a disaster for Arizona. It has been a tough time for them to try and hold leads. So look for the Orioles. If they're trailing early, still a chance to come back against that pen. Now, looking at the starting pitching matchups, the series starts tonight, 7:05 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. Remember, this is an Apple TV Plus broadcast on Friday night, so it will not be on Mass, and you got to get Apple TV Plus, but you can get a free trial and cancel it if you'd like to, just to watch this game. Cole Irvin, 21 consecutive scoreless innings over his last 3 starts, takes the mound for the O's, and the right-handed pitcher Brandon Pfaadt will go for the Diamondbacks. Pfaadt kind of broke onto the scene as the D-backs de facto number 3 starter in the postseason last year. 4.67 ERA in 41 innings this year has not been good, but he struck out 42 batters and walked only 6. That is an incredible ratio for Brandon Pfaadt. It's a really good sweeper and a really good changeup with a solid fastball. They all get swings and misses. He's got a really good arm from the right side. Then you go to Saturday, 4:05 p.m. Eastern time. John Means, after just dazzling in Cincinnati in his return, makes his second start of the season. He'll go up against the young right-hander Ryan Nelson. Ryan Nelson has really, really struggled this year. The reason Nelson is even starting for the D-backs is because Eduardo Rodriguez, who they gave a 4-year deal to this offseason, is still on the injured list. So they still got to go to Ryan Nelson. In 21 innings, he's got a 5.23 ERA on the season. 27 hits allowed, just not good. He's got a 95-mile-per-hour fastball, but he really has nothing to go with it. He throws his cutter a lot, and honestly, his cutter has been terrible this year, just getting whacked all over the yard. Hopefully, the Orioles can do the same. And on Saturday, if you are going to the game at 4 o'clock, stop by Checker Spot Group Brewing Company over by the stadium at 2 o'clock. Going to be going on with the guys from Orioles on the Verge for a live podcast again at 2 o'clock at Checker Spot. You can come listen to us talk Orioles and come say hello before the game on Saturday. And it ends with the Sunday finale at 1:35. Dean Kramer takes the mound, been pitching really well lately for the O's. And it's the D-backs ace taking the mound. The right-handed pitcher, Zach Gallen, goes to the hill. He's been great this year, a 2.84 ERA, 41 strikeouts, 12 walks in 38 innings for the D-backs, coming off 6 scoreless innings against the Reds earlier this week in his last start. But you saw that Orioles facing all 3 right-handed pitchers this year. They've actually been better against lefties than righties. So you will see, Ryan O'Hearn in that lineup every day. We won't see a lot of maybe Jorge Mateo. We'll see if they can get Heston Kjerstad in there for a start. But we'll see what the O's can do against the D-backs this weekend. Then I'll be back on Monday recapping everything we see from Baltimore and Arizona in the series in Baltimore this weekend. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.